I'm talking with Phil Gawne, and away from the Queenie's issue, which obviously is ongoing, you're trying to come up with a security strategy to safeguard the nation's food supply. That sounds very grand. What's wrong with our food supply?
Our food supply is generally good. There are always things that we can do to improve that. We are focused still primarily on production of red meat, dairy, with a fair cereal sector. Very limited in terms of horticulture, very limited in terms of processed food. So we produce raw products, but we don't then go on to do much by way of adding value to those products. So there's lots we can do internally in terms of growing our food sector. But the food strategy is much more than that. This is about food security, and it is recognising that the United Nations are saying that we're going to have an increase in demand for food over the next 30 years or so in the region of 50%. Added to which, Professor Beddington, the former senior scientific advisor, issued a report, I think, for the UK last year, in which he predicted a 20% reduction in overall food production as a result of climate change over the course of the next 20 to 30 years. Now, that obviously doesn't compute, does it? You've got a 20% reduction in food production, you've got a 50% increase in demand. The Isle of Man, quite clearly, we've weathered the financial storms, but generally speaking, Europe and the West is becoming less affluent than some of the developing parts of the world. It's likely that they're going to catch up in the next 10 or 20 years. So the food that we can currently go out onto the open market and buy relatively easily is not necessarily going to be there. So the strategy is not just looking in the sort of intensely focused Manx sector, although clearly that's very important to us. It's also looking at that big picture and saying, where do we need to be in 10 or 20 years' time in terms of our local food sector to make sure, first of all, we've got enough food to feed the people here, but secondly, that we can exploit the opportunities that the market will present.
Well, we've always had problems with production scales. I mean, the meat plant and just everything from cheese and that sort of thing is, we're always hearing is a bit more problematical because we're so small. I mean, where does this leave all this?
Well, it's part of the problem that we need to resolve. What we need to do is find ways in which we can make our food sectors profitable. There's no doubt about that. But we also have to be looking at the security of food production on the island. We have to recognise that if we lost the ability to grow milling wheat on the island and bake our own bread on the island, that's probably not going to be a problem to us for the next 10, 20 years. But potentially thereafter, and over that 20-year period, wheat prices are likely to go up as there is an increasing demand for food, as global food production becomes more difficult. And we need to be aware of that, and in my view, we need to do everything we can to retain our milling wheat sector on the island.
Have you got the farmers on your side? I mean, just like the country care thing, you're trying to cap them or look at how they're getting these payments. Do you think you're asking a lot of them and at the same time not supporting them enough?
No, I think well, farmers will always say that the department's not doing enough, and that may well be the case. We haven't got as much resource as we used to have. We don't have as many officers. We don't have as much policy time that we would have had in the past. So yes, there's always plenty more we can do. But we are engaged with the agricultural industry. This broader food strategy is it is broader. It's not specifically looking at the local food sector, although that is part of the strategy. This is basically asking questions about where the Isle of Man should be in the next
20 to 40 years.
20 to 40 years, absolutely. So it's a bigger vision, recognising that there are going to be these pressures. They are going to become more and more obvious as we go through the next few decades. And it's the overarching strategy. It's pulling together various policies that already exist, identifying gaps in our policies. And one of the gaps now is how do we grow the food sector, and that's going to be filled hopefully in July, maybe later in the autumn.
But until you get all the supermarkets, the food outlets in Isle of Man to even support Manx products, and we know where we're going with this conversation, we have it from time to time, you still can't get into certain outlets. Is that still frustrating you?
Well, yes, it is, and it's an area that we will have to address. There's no doubt that there are some of the larger supermarkets that aren't based on the island, or the headquarters aren't based on the island, that see the Isle of Man as a cash cow and they milk it dry. Now, what we have to do is recognise that people go to these shops because they like the service, they like the quality, they like the prices that are offered there. And I've got no problem with people liking those things. My problem is that the extreme profits that these stores are making on the island, you would think that they would be able to put a little bit back in terms of ensuring that we've got a secure food supply.
I think people think they cannot understand how you cannot thump a table on this one. I mean, they want to be here. There must be the ultimate legislation that could be used if need be, carrot and stick and all this sort of thing. I mean, they did. I mean, let's put a name to it. Tesco presumably is one of the ones you talk about here, yes. They did have some originally, didn't they, when they first came in, and then there's been problems since and well documented. But is there no way that you can make them take Manx products like this? Meat particularly?
Well, I think Tesco, bizarrely, does take its responsibility seriously elsewhere. So what I need to do is find the right people to speak to. And the store manager in Douglas is probably not the right person for me to be speaking to about these issues anyway. I need to find someone in Tesco and say, look, the week that they were pulling out of supplying Manx meat on the Isle of Man, the chief executive of Tesco was in Northern Ireland launching a new strategy to buy as much local produce as they possibly can and to sell as much local produce as they could. Now, if they can do that with our neighbours across the water, they can do it here. They just have to have the will to do it. And with a large organisation like Tesco and some of the other supermarkets, perhaps the problem is finding the right person to speak to. I'm certainly continuing to look for the right person to speak to.
It does seem strange though. This is going on for a long time, and you say you can't find the right man to talk to. I mean, this is. We talked this time last year, I think, maybe the year before, about this whole thing. Since ever was the meat problem.
It's much more recent, I think, that the current round of obfuscations, for want of a better word, that I've been having from Tesco. But we're developing policies as well. Tesco can either be part of the process of developing the policies or not part of the process. It's up to them to decide, really. And it's not just Tesco, there are other supermarkets. If they're not part of the process, then they're going to be left out. And we have to take into account not just what the buying public want, because it's not just about that retail experience for the public. This is about a national food security strategy as well. We've got to make sure that we have in place a strategy which ensures that the people who currently are going to Tesco's or ShopRite or wherever to buy their food are going to be able to continue to do that in the future. And what is absolutely clear from all the international sort of global food politic discussions is that it's going to become increasingly difficult for the main supermarkets in the UK to access their products if they are not more engaged with the producers.
I suggest to you that obviously people have a choice where they go to get their food, which you kind of touched on, but certainly the second one is publicity. I mean, these big companies hate negative publicity, and maybe you're not yelling enough in that direction at the minute.
You could say that. That's always a possibility. But again, in politics, you achieve more by trying to approach people in the right way first. If by some chance we manage finally to find the right person to speak to, and that right person doesn't give satisfactory answers, then perhaps we'll have the opportunity to raise it in a more public way. But in the first instance, I still want to talk to all the main retailers on the island so that I can get a better feel for what their issues are and how we can work collaboratively to not only allow them to have good businesses on the island, but also to allow us as a government to do what we should do for the people we represent, which is ensure that they have a secure supply of food.